I pressed transfer at 3:12 a.m., with my hand shaking so hard the phone almost slipped from my fingers. Every dollar I had saved since I was 19, tips from double shifts, tax refunds I never let myself touch. The tiny windfall from my grandma's ring I sold after a fight with my mother slid through a glowing screen into his account like water disappearing down a drain. I told myself it was love, that brave kind of love people post about with long captions and hashtags about loyalty and ride or die, the kind of love that tethers two lives across storms. I told myself I would sleep lighter without the secret of his death gnawing at our bed frame. I told myself this was how adults behave when things get hard. And I also told myself something I didn't admit out loud, that if I didn't save him, he might leave, and I would be the kind of woman he was not worth staying for. To make sense of my choices, you should know that I used to be the girl who hoarded coupons like baseball cards. I used to walk past store windows and whisper, "Not today, future me is hungry." I counted quarters for laundry and put a sticky note over my stove that said "No Postmates." It was like a game against myself, and winning meant sleeping with a tiny pink number in my banking app that crawled upward, a snail carrying its house to safety. 27 now, but back then 24 and smug about my discipline. I didn't come for money, and I didn't want that to be my excuse for never having any. I built a little emergency fund and watched it swell, then dip, then swell again. Sometimes I'd open the app just to look. It made me feel steady, like I could withstand a gust of wind without tipping over. Then I met him. It started with ordinary stuff, bad sushi, a funny story about a dog that wasn't his, a playlist that felt like he had tapped into my teenage brain and stolen all the songs I hummed when I couldn't sleep. He was careful with doors and chairs and the backs of my knees. He noticed the chapped skin on my knuckles and remembered my brother's birthday without writing it down. When he talked about the future, it was never I. It was always we. Even the way he said the word felt like a warm coat at the end of a cold day. We didn't move fast, we just didn't move slow. Hear this way of leaning in like he was listening to the part of me that doesn't make sound. I found myself doing small things to make his life easier, picking up his dry cleaning, readying a coffee for his dawn meetings, straightening his shelves because his books were arranged by chaos, not topic. He said I made things smoother. He said I made him feel like he could breathe. You wouldn't think breathing requires help until someone tells you the air has been heavy around them for years. I like being oxygen. It was a rainy week with the kind of rain that fills your shoes from the top down when he told me about the debts. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't cry. He sat on the edge of my couch and rubbed his temples and named numbers like a nurse reading a chart. Cards, interest, late fees that multiplied like rabbits, mistakes he called dumb 20 stuff that followed him like a stray cat. He talked about running at a treadmill that accelerated under his feet until even water breaks cost compound interest. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. You know how sometimes you feel a problem stretching its wings above your head? It was like that. He said he could carry us, but the truth was it would be tighter than I imagined, and not just for a month. For a while. He said we'd, and then, softly, if we can't, I don't know how we make the rest of our life work. I want to be honest about what happened inside me. A car alarm of fear. A smear of shame that my careful savings weren't meant for this exact crisis and yet felt like they were, like a Chekhov's gun on the mantle, polished and ready. I was proud that I had it, and I hated that I was proud. The math was simple in a way math rarely is. I could help and we could be okay. Or I could watch him drown while standing on a pier built from my own thrift. He didn't ask for it outright then. He just put the numbers on the coffee table between us and let them sit there, pawing at my knees. I told myself love means you don't let the person you love become small under a weight they can't move alone. But a smaller, uglier voice whispered something too, that I might not be enough unless I was useful. So I helped. That first transfer was a scorched earth act of devotion that tasted like guilt and victory at once. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? I paid my boyfriend's debt because I believe in us sounds like a caption under a photo of matching mugs. It doesn't sound like a financial strategy. He kept living with me, and we bought cheaper coffee beans and stopped going out. I downloaded budgeting apps that made confetti when you reached a goal, except our goals were weird, like stay afloat without drowning. We cooked pasta and rice bowls that looked like apologies. He promised, without pomp, to be different. He promised that this was the turning point, the line I'd helped him cross. I noticed the differences in little ways. He slept better. He ate slower. When the phone rang, he didn't flinch. And here's the part you might hate me for. I felt strong. Useful. The woman who catches the falling plate and doesn't even break stride. We started using phrases like a debt-free date and future family until they felt like furniture in our mouths. I kept an eye on my bank app like a widow on a harbor and told myself not to panic at the emptiness because emptiness can mean possibility, like a blank page. I took more shifts. I made lunch in bulk in little containers like Lego bricks. We weren't glamorous, but we were a team. The sticker on the stove said no Postmates, and beneath it, he added no heroics with a doodle of a cape. We laughed. A year passed like a bad song you get used to. We got good at stretching bills. I learned to iron dress shirts. He started talking about the opportunities that flickered at the edges of his days, the friend of a friend with a distribution idea, a niche market hungry for a clean, modern version of something dusty and dated, the way new brands appear overnight like mushrooms after rain. He'd trace invisible graphs on the table while I washed dishes, and I'd feel his pulse. This what if Before you judge me, remember that when someone you love starts talking about building something, it's contagious. You start measuring your kitchen for bigger kitchens. Then came the second ask, if you can even call it an ask. New interest rates, he said, new obligations he'd inherited from an old situation he didn't want to detail because it made him feel like he was dragging the past into our living room. He presented it like surgery, necessary, expensive, timed. The sum was larger, abstract and thick, like a shadow with weight. He wasn't reckless, he had spreadsheets and words like consolidation and a bridge. I understood just enough to be dangerous, that money can be moved like chess pieces, and the board punishes hesitation. He framed it as the last mountain before the plateau where normal couples stroll on weekends, the last rickety bridge between the life we had and the life we wanted. I wanted the life we wanted. I also wanted to be the woman who didn't turn the car around when the road narrowed. I had warning signs. A friend raised an eyebrow and asked careful questions about the numbers. I laughed it off because my friend wasn't in my kitchen at midnight when he looked at me like we were co-authors of a plan, not characters ad-libbing a tragedy. There were emails I never got to see, meetings he described as boring and just logistics. There was the way he tightened when I asked specifics, like a muscle around a bruise. But I had taught myself to be the calm one, the one who doesn't demand constant transparency like a cop at a checkpoint. I told myself that trust is letting someone else handle the wheel sometimes without grabbing at it every time the car drifts a little. Fear crept in at the edges, though, the way cold seeps under a door you thought you sealed. It wasn't about the money, not exactly. It was about the shape of our days. He was gone more. He called me from parking lots. He used phrases like in the pipeline and targeting Q4, and I found myself nodding like a talk show audience because I didn't want to sound like the small-town girlfriend who didn't get it. We were turning into a couple with secrets that weren't sexy, just heavy. And my value, the worst part, felt tied to my usefulness, to how readily I could turn my savings into scaffolding. Why did I say yes? There's the noble answer about love, about shared burden and long-term vision. There's the less noble answer about fear, about the way the idea of losing him scratched something feral inside me. We had a vision board. Don't laugh with magazine clippings of places we'd go. If I'm being completely honest, I didn't want to take those pictures down. I didn't want to reimagine a future alone, eating scrambled eggs over a sink again. So I agreed. I liquidated what little had grown back like hair after a bad haircut. I took on a line of credit under my name because the rates were better, because I had a clean history, because the bank liked me. I did it while telling myself stories about marriage and people who survived cancer and flood and foreclosure by holding hands and breathing in sync. I signed things that made my skin prickle. He said he would handle payments invisibly, that it would be like it never happened, that someday we'd laugh about those scary months. I wanted the future laugh so badly I practically pre-laughed at the bank. The teller smiled like she'd seen this play before and never liked the ending. Here's where the tempo changed. He became very, very busy. Not absent, exactly. Wired. Calming. Efficient in a way that felt almost surgical. He bought cheaper shoes, then nicer ones. He stopped using cash. He came home after midnight smelling like printers and cardboard and the kind of cologne you test once at a department store and then feel too fancy to wear again. He said he was in it, and I didn't press the pronoun. Because I, too, was in it. I had given my savings a second funeral. I slept in a bed made of numbers. Around then the lies changed flavor. Before, the things he hid felt like protection, like covering me with his jacket in the rain. After, they felt like a locked door. He started using a tone with me, polite, careful, professional, when I asked about timelines. He was always kind. Always. For kindness can be a fencing sword. It keeps you at a precise distance. I found clues like stray breadcrumbs that made a trail I didn't want to follow. A folder on his desktop labeled with a generic term I almost didn't click because it looked like a default. Inside, mock-ups, pitches, a market analysis that sounded like him even though his name wasn't on it. Photos of him at a conference over a weekend he told me was a guy's cabin thing. Not incriminating by itself, just loud. An email chain with a supplier where he negotiated numbers that made my mouth go dry. A calendar invite for a board thing, yes, board at an address in a building I'd admired for how smug it looked in the afternoon light. He wasn't having an affair with the person. He was having an affair with a plan. The day I realized the full shape of it, I was standing in line at a coffee cart because I had allowed myself a latte as a treat for surviving an especially gruesome week at work. I was reading an article a friend sent about a local founder who had built a brand in a niche market by betting on himself when everyone else said no. The photo was him in a soft jacket with a grin I knew in the dark. The article described a seed round, advisors' traction. It mentioned funding, the kind that doesn't come from a well-timed coupon. It mentioned, in the admiring language of people who like a certain kind of myth, that he started with nothing and clawed his way into something through grit and vision. There it was, my grocery money turned into a headline. I went home and opened his closet because I didn't know what else to do. I stared at his shirts and tried to imagine the woman who would handle this better, who would schedule a time to talk and enter the room with a spreadsheet and a list of feelings bullet-pointed into neat, digestible language. I'm not that woman. I cried on the floor and then I cleaned the kitchen compulsively, as if shining a counter could unscramble a truth. I turned the oven on. I turned it off. I wrote a text to him that sounded like a manager scheduling a check-in. I deleted it. I stood in the shower until the water cooled and kept standing there until it was frigid because I felt too hot inside my skin. When he came home, I didn't perform rage. I didn't throw anything. I told him what I'd read and what I'd found and how the math was doing laps around me, and I asked the simple question you would have asked months ago, is there debt? He looked at me like a doctor who can't give the prognosis you rehearsed together. He said he had never lied about wanting a life with me. He said he had needed seed money. He said our money made a bridge and then a road and then a runway. He said if he had put my name on the deck or the cap table, it would have complicated everything. He said investors like a clean story. He said we were that story's messy middle. He said it like a prayer and a thesis. Never once did he use the word sorry. Sometimes betrayal is not a door that slams. Sometimes it's a hinge that squeaks for a year and then one day the door isn't there anymore and you're outside in the weather. He slept on the couch that night by his choice, not because I asked. I stared at the ceiling and tried to label my feelings like Jaws: rage, humiliation, fear, oh yes, oh grief. I wasn't done loving him. That's the part people will hate me for. Love doesn't evaporate because a spreadsheet got ambitious. If anything, I was intoxicated by his audacity. If you're looking for a clean moral, you won't find it here. Over the next weeks, I told myself we could fix this. We had to renegotiate what we meant. I could be mad and still be his partner. I rehearsed lines in a mirror about equity and partnership and acknowledgement, nothing dramatic, just a name somewhere it mattered. I wanted a place in the story that matched the bruise on my credit report. I wanted the confetti app to throw me a parade for surviving a pot where I became funding without paperwork. He moved through the apartment like a temporary tenant. Polite. Focused. Hacking mental boxes. Our home went quiet like an office after a move. He was almost sparkling with momentum, vibrating with it, and there I was trying to staple this new story to the old one and call it the same book. There are points in a relationship where the other person's forward motion makes it impossible to stand still. You either jump on or you get thrown. I tried to jump, I swear I did. I offered to help with operations. I drafted a list of things I'm actually good at: customer service, logistics, copy that doesn't sound like it was written by a committee. He thanked me, always kindly, and said not yet, then we'll see, then down the line. If there's one phrase that should be a red flag across languages, it's down the line. I found out how it would end in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows where the afternoon makes squares of light on the rug. He stood with his hands in his pockets the way he does when he is trying to be gentle. He said the company had a path, said he was answerable to other people now, said there was scrutiny and structure and obligations that didn't leave much room for personal complications. I told him I wasn't a complication. I told him I was the person who traded sleep for his stability, the person who turned down trips and clothes and dinners so he could keep chasing a dream he framed as ours. I didn't say it bitterly. I said it like a fact you sit on the counter and admire for its clean line. He nodded. He said he respected me. He said I had been good to him. He said the past year had been transformative and he had to keep moving. He said, with a voice so calm I almost mistook it for kindness, that he needed to protect the narrative of the company. He said the company needed a founder who looked like he didn't finish the sentence, but I heard it's someone who had clawed his way up by himself, not a man who had been bankrolled by a girlfriend who made soup and believed in miracles. He said he hoped I would understand. He said he would make me whole someday when it was possible, which is another phrase that should be printed on hazard tape. Then he left. Not in a storm. Not with a slammed door. He left with the soft click of the latch and the scent of department store cologne lingering like a footnote. I sat on the rug and watched the light squares climb the wall and disappear. I thought about calling my mother, who would have said exactly the things you'd think she would say. I thought about writing to the journalist who had written the glowing piece. I thought about a lawsuit, a small claims court judge with a stern brow, the humiliation of turning love into exhibits. I pictured myself standing there with screenshots and bank statements and the truth that refuses to be tidy. I pictured the way he would look at me across that room, not angry, just inconvenienced. I pictured winning and still going home to an apartment that smelled like cardboard, not him. There were practicalities. The payment dates, the balances, the tiny universe of fees and minimums that constellated around my name. I made a spreadsheet I named Recovery and color-coded it. It felt like sweeping up after a party I wasn't invited to. People talk about heartbreak like it's all sobbing and Daisy's Preston books. Sometimes it's just math and a dry throat. I told 2 friends. One said, with love heavy as a blanket, that I have been naive. The other said, with a little laugh she couldn't suppress, that I had been a venture capitalist without equity. I wanted to be angry at the jokes because it's not funny, except parts of it are if you tilt your head. I don't need you to be gentle with me in the comments. I know what I did. I also know that if you had been in my kitchen at midnight, you might have done exactly the same thing. And if that sentence makes you defensive, sit with that. He is successful now. The brand is in stores where the lighting makes everything look better than it is. People tag the company on social media with captions about hustle and vision. His face does that thing faces do when cameras like them. Sometimes I pass a display and the packaging winks at me and I feel this weird combination of pride and nausea. This is the part where the internet usually splits. Half of you will say I should expose him, torch his reputation, become the cautionary tale he deserves. The other half will say I should take this as a lesson about contracts and boundaries and never funding a man's dream that doesn't have my name stamped on it. You'll all be right, and somehow it still won't fix the way my chest tightens when I smell that cologne in an elevator. I learned something I didn't want to learn about love and money. Not the meme version where you should never mix business with pleasure, but the quieter lesson about what it means to be needed versus what it means to be chosen. Being needed is intoxicating. It is also temporary. Needs change when the storm passes. Being chosen is different. It leaves a paper trail. It has your name on the door. I was a bridge. He was a traveler. Bridges don't go anywhere, and travelers don't stop unless the view is perfect. Would I do it again? I ask myself that at least once a week. It would be easy to say no and harvest the moral high ground. But here's my unflattering honesty. A part of me is still proud that I could help someone cross from one life to another, even if I wasn't invited to the ribbon cutting. That part of me is at war with the part that aches for restitution, acknowledgement, something you can put in your hand that says you mattered. Both parts live here now. I make room for them on the couch. We watch his interviews on mute and we pay my bills on time. Some nights I think about knocking on his fancy office door and asking for my story back. Not the money though, yes, that too, but the narrative where I am not an invisible investor with a soup habit. The narrative where I am a person whose faith had weight and consequence. The narrative where the headline doesn't erase me to make him look taller. I imagine telling him I kept all the receipts, not the financial ones though I have those, but the ones written in small domestic handwriting, the rides to the copy shop, the calming of his breath, the editing of his pitch so it sounded like a person speaking, not a brochure. There is no line item for that. There is no reimbursement form. I also think about a different version of this story where I tell you I burned his stuff or keyed a car or exposed him on a podcast. That would be satisfying. It would also be a lie. I am not a destroyer. I am a builder who attached her scaffolding to the wrong facade. So here's what I did. I closed our joint cloud folder. I deleted the vision board. I took the sticky note off the stove. I started buying flowers on Fridays, the cheap ones with the drooping heads that perk up overnight if you trim them and give them a good drink. I filled my apartment with things that didn't make sense to a spreadsheet, tiny luxuries like a candle that smells like a forest I've never seen, a lemon squeezer that works better than a fork I used for years, a silly, soft blanket that pretends to be fur. It felt childish and defiant and necessary. A lawyer I met for a consult asked me a question that lodged in my ribs. What would you accept as enough? A number? An apology? A line of text on a website? I didn't know. I still don't. There's a version of me that wants interest at a punitive rate and a clawback clause on my heart. There's a version of me that wants 140 characters that say I wouldn't be here without her. There's a version that wants a time machine. None of those versions get what they want. Real life is poorer at closure than movies. You don't get end credits. You get a Monday. This is one. I woke up and made coffee and didn't check his social. I checked my bank app because I still do that, and the number is not as tiny as it was. I'm building again, slower, smarter. When people ask why I'm single, I say something flippant and change the subject. The truth is, I'm not auditioning anyone for the role of needing me. I am auditioning myself for the role of choosing me. It is less cinematic. It is more durable. I started telling this story because I thought I wanted to warn someone like me, someone who believes that love is a multi-tool that can pry open locked boxes and unspool knots and fix old wiring without electrocuting you. Consider yourself warned, but not in the way you expect. I am not saying never help. I'm saying help in ways that leave you whole if the person you help edits you out of the final draft. Don't fund a myth where your name becomes inconvenient. He texted me once, months after the soft latch click, a message as brief and frictionless as an invoice reminder. He said the company had hit a milestone. He said he hoped I was well. I stared at the screen until the letters stopped making words and began to look like a design. I didn't respond. I put my phone face down and went to the sink and washed a glass with a focus so sharp it felt like prayer. Somewhere in that building with the soft jacket man and a vapor of espresso, he was probably giving a talk about grit again. People love grit. It photographs well. I don't know how to end this except to tell you the thing he said to me when he left, the sentence I have carried around like a small, hot coin. He said he had done this himself. It rings in my ears when I pay my bills, when I walk past his product on a shelf, when someone online posts a quote about no one coming to save you and thinks it's wisdom. Maybe he truly believes it. Maybe he needs to. Maybe that's how some stories stay upright by ignoring the scaffolding. I can't make him tell a different story. I can only tell mine. So here it is, I gave what I had twice. I made a bridge and stood on it waving him forward. He waved back and then he didn't. I am rebuilding on the shore with my own hands and my own money, and there are days when the wind is kind and the view is better than I expected. And if you're still wondering whether I regret it, the answer changes depending on the hour. Sometimes yes, with a purity that stuns me. Sometimes no, because I like the woman who can be that brave, even if she was also afraid. Both truths are true at once, and holding them is heavy work. You can judge me for that. You can pity me. You can call me irresponsible or tender-hearted or stupid or loyal. I have been all of those in sequence, and sometimes simultaneously. What I want from you isn't advice. It's a question for yourselves. When someone you love presents a story and asks you to finance the plot, what do you need to see in the credits to know you weren't just an extra? Write that down before the first dollar leaves your hand. Tattoo it somewhere you can't ignore. Because the worst part isn't losing the money. It's hearing, on a calm afternoon in a tidy room, a voice you once would have drowned to save telling you with perfect composure, I did this myself, and realizing the only person who can contradict him is you.